Well, Kathy, thank you. Great to be here. Hot outside. Please be careful. I think in the interest of saying something nice, remember, so far Con Ed has not screwed up. You know, they've talked for years about investing, and apparently they have, and it's working so far. So I don't mean to jinx it, but let us hope. Anyways, Kathy, thank you for that nice introduction. Good afternoon. I hope all of you are getting out and enjoying the city this summer, although take it easy today. I went to Yankee Stadium on Friday night to see a guy with a lot of hits. No, it was not Derek Jeter. It was Paul McCartney. It was a great show, and believe it or not, Paul and I actually have a few things in common. We are both the same age. I know it's tough to believe that Paul is only 49, but it is true. We both have an ear for music. His is tuned, not mine. And we both are known as the cute one, although that's the way I remember it. Now, you want to know how I get from that, why is that a segue into a serious speech? Here it is. I cannot promise that today's speech will be as much fun as singing along to Hey Jude, but if you feel free to, you can feel free to clap your hands as much as you like. Best I can do. Anyways, thanks to Crain and Jill Kaplan and Kathy and the partnership for putting on this conference on the future of New York City. You know, in government, just like in many corporations, the focus of management tends to be on the next day, or the next quarter, or the next year, instead of the next decade or the next century. But cities and organizations that do not look far ahead get left far behind. And that is not a mistake that we will make. We are focused on tomorrow as we are on today. And I'm very proud to say that our administration, from the very beginning, has always taken the long view. We have based our policy and investment decisions not on whether they will generate headlines or votes, but on whether they will generate a new century of economic activity. When I was first elected in 2001, New York City still had one foot planted firmly in the 20th century. And unfortunately, it was the first half of the 20th century. Most of our basic infrastructure then was 50 to 100 years old. Most of our waterfront reflected an industrial age that had long since disappeared. Most of our neighborhoods had seen relatively little new housing construction, even as our population was rising dramatically. And most of our economy was far too dependent on Wall Street. In drawing up an economic development strategy after 9/11, our ultimate goal was not recovery or even rebuilding. It was renewal. Renewal of our infrastructure, renewal of our economy, renewal of our school system, renewal of our parks and streets and neighborhoods. We had to drag our city out of the past by envisioning a brighter future and then building it. The future we envision for New York has a stronger, more modern foundation, and so we have major investments in infrastructure projects like the third water tunnel that are not exactly sexy, but are so essential to our growth. The third water tunnel was begun, you should remember, back in 1970 so that we could fix the other two without any disruptions. But like the Second Avenue subway, it fell victim to budget cuts again and again. I'm happy to say, however, that now, after the $2.5 billion we've invested in good times and bad, the next major phase of the water tunnel is scheduled to be completed in 2013. The future we envision for New York has greener neighborhoods with more recreational opportunities for young and old alike. And so we have undertaken the biggest investment in our park system since Franklin Delano Roosevelt's New Deal, with 680 new acres added over the past 9 years and another 1,800 in the pipeline. The future we envision for New York has enough space for generations of families and companies to grow, and so we have rezoned major swaths of a city to allow for more housing and commercial development. On the far west side of Manhattan, we're building an extension to the number 7 subway line, the first city-funded subway track in 25 years, and I'm happy to say it looks like it will be delivered on time, something that you don't hear very often about subway construction. It will do for the far west side what the Jubilee Tube Line did for Canary Wharf in London, transform an old industrial area into one of the most dynamic neighborhoods in the world. At Willets Point, we've begun the work of transforming an environmentally degraded former landfill into a beautiful waterfront community with jobs and housing for the middle class. On Staten Island, we've begun the work of transforming the old Homeport Naval Base into a beautiful waterfront community with jobs and housing for the middle class. At Hunters Point, we've begun the work of transforming an old industrial area into a beautiful waterfront community with jobs and housing for the middle class. Now, all of these projects and many others, we are doing what New Yorkers have always done best, envisioning the city of tomorrow and creating the conditions for it to come to life. We are doing what New Yorkers have done at key points throughout our history, investing, so that the future of this city will be brighter than the past. You know, when our city fathers created the street grid 200 years ago, there was no need to stretch it to 155th Street, but they did because they imagined growth that they could not see. When Central Park was built 150 years ago, there was no need to carve out such a large swath of Manhattan, but they did, over the objections of those who said it was too big, too costly, and took too much time to build, because they imagined the greatest public park in the country. When the first subway line was built, there was no need to stretch it to Upper Manhattan, but they did because they imagined neighborhoods growing out of farmlands. New York became the world's greatest city because New Yorkers dared to dream and build it. And today, we're looking far into the future once again and launching one of the most promising economic development initiatives in the city's long history. This morning, we released a request for proposals to universities near and far. And the offer that we've made is straightforward. We will provide prime New York real estate at virtually no cost, plus put up $100 million in infrastructure upgrades, in exchange for a university's commitment to build or expand a world-class science and engineering campus here in our city. We are offering sites at 3 possible locations, all of them underutilized and all of them overflowing with potential: Governor's Island, the Brooklyn Navy Yard, and Roosevelt Island. Now, this is not the first time that government has offered land and funding in exchange for university development. Governments around the world are not only offering American universities land, they are offering to pick up all capital and operating costs associated with an expansion on their soil. They recognize just how important universities are to economic growth because they have seen it happen here in America. In 1862, the U.S. government created a land grant program for the creation of new universities. President Lincoln and Congress sought to promote innovation and expertise in agriculture and engineering because they knew these fields were critical to the nation's economic growth, and how right they were. Cornell, MIT, Cal Berkeley, the University of Michigan, and so many other major universities grew out of the land grant program. And along with them came pioneering discoveries that helped America become the world's largest economy. New York City is lucky to have so many top-flight universities here. In fact, we are the biggest college town in America. We have more than 600,000 students enrolled in higher education, which is more students than Boston has people. We're lucky to have several top-flight engineering schools, and I'm glad to report that they are taking our offer seriously. But they're not the only ones. Universities from around the country and some from around the world have expressed interest in our offer, and that's how it should be. Because we are an international city, and a city that believes in free competition, we are open to any person with any dream, any entrepreneur with any idea, any company with any capital, and any university with any proposal. Universities are so important to our future, and that is why we have worked so hard to support major expansions at Columbia, Cooper Union, Fordham, and NYU. And it's why we have provided more than $1 billion to CUNY in recent years. But by extending this offer, our goal is not to help any particular institution grow. It is to help our entire city grow. To understand why this initiative is so important to our city's future, I think we must not only look ahead to where the global economy is going, but let's look back for a second to where we've been, because what we are proposing is really the most ambitious attempt yet to counteract a decade-long economic trend that once threatened the very future of American cities. So let me step back a few decades to my first year in New York, 1966. I arrived in New York with a BA in engineering and an MBA. I didn't have a grand plan for my life and always assumed I would end up working for an engineering or manufacturing company. But a good friend of mine, the late Steve Fenster, pointed me to Wall Street. It was a lucky break, because even though no one knew at the time, the American economy was beginning a prolonged and painful period of decline in manufacturing. I was fired from my job at Salomon Brothers in 1981. But I think it's probably true that if I'd gone to work in the manufacturing industry, I would have been fired much sooner. Between 1966 and 2001, the year I was elected mayor, New York City went from about 800,000 jobs in manufacturing to about 150,000. That's right, 800,000 down to 150,000. 3 out of every 4 jobs were lost, and most of them were middle-class jobs that did not require a college degree. New York was not alone. This happened in cities across the United States. As it did, many places that relied on 1 or 2 major employers began rusting out. Now, New York managed to survive better than most cities, largely because of the strength of our financial industry and the continued arrival of new immigrant groups. But at the same time, our economic health became ever more dependent on Wall Street booms and busts. When I came to office in 2002, we recognized that problem and we set about trying to correct it. We created a 5-borough economic development strategy focused on expanding the industries that has the potential to grow and expand here. And that includes not only finance, but also film and television, biotech, fashion, arts and culture, tourism, modern manufacturing, and small businesses of every kind. Our goal was simple: to expand job growth outside of Wall Street so that when the financial markets turned down, as they always do, more New Yorkers could keep their jobs. What's the result? Well, since the worst national recession in decades hit, 6% of all private sector American jobs have been lost. Here in New York City, that number is less than 1%. It's actually 5.8% of all private sector jobs gone. New York City, only 0.5%. We must be doing something right. Our efforts to diversify our economy and strengthen the infrastructure that is the foundation of our growth allowed us to go into the recession later than the rest of the country and come out of it faster and stronger than the rest of the country. When the markets collapsed in 2008, we made a decision to double down on our diversification strategy in a few key ways. First, we expanded our Workforce One career centers, which helped connect people to jobs in industries that were still hiring. And last year, I'm happy to say, we made a record 31,000 job placements. And this year, by opening 10 more Workforce One career centers, we expect to break that record. Everybody in government's talking about creating jobs. The difference is we are doing it. Second, we launched a new initiative to encourage entrepreneurship. With companies laying off skilled workers, one way we could beat the recession was to help some of them launch their own new businesses, and many have. And third, we held meetings with industry leaders in every major sector of our economy to understand what we could do to help. We asked 325 CEOs, entrepreneurs, university leaders, and other major employers what were the key needs that they had. And the most common refrain that they repeated over and over again was technological capacity that is critical to their growth, and there's just not enough of it here. And they are right. For most of our history, New York City was the technological capital of the United States and the world. We became the country's economic engine because our entrepreneurs were the most innovative, and their ideas and investment built our city into a global powerhouse. When Robert Fulton built the first commercially viable steamship in 1806, he spawned a shipping industry that would employ countless New Yorkers for generations to come. When Samuel Moss sent the first telegraph message in 1844, He spawned a communications industry that would employ countless New Yorkers for generations to come. When Charles Pfizer founded his drugstore in Williamsburg in 1848 with a $2,500 loan from his father, he spawned a pharmaceutical industry that would employ countless New Yorkers for generations to come. When Alexander Graham Bell opened Bell Labs on West Street in 1898, he became the largest industrial research center in the United States, or it became. He helped spawn all sorts of innovations, including talking movies and television, and he eventually employed countless New Yorkers for many generations. All of these innovations, and so much more, began with little more than an idea that turned into an entire industry. The fact is, New York was Startup City before there were startups. When I created Bloomberg LP in 1981, no one called us a startup, but that's what we were. We had an untested idea that relied on untested technology developed by a one-time engineering student with a few computer scientists. Of course, back then they weren't called scientists, they were called nerds, but that's another issue. But I could never have built the business without them. Unfortunately for our city, my company was more the exception than the rule. During the 1980s and 90s, Silicon Valley, not New York City, became the world's capital of technology startups. And that is still true today. But if I'm right, and if we succeed in this mission, it won't be true forever. Over the past few years, our city has become increasingly important in the technology and bioscience industries. We've made major investments to help bioscience companies grow and expand in New York City. For instance, our $25 million investment in lab space in Brooklyn and Manhattan has helped attract $775 million for the state and private developers. The first phase of our new lab in the East River Science Park was completed in 1910 and is already virtually full. At the Brooklyn Army Terminal, our BioBat lab space is anchored by the International AIDS Vaccine Initiative. And across the city, we are home to some of the most promising and creative technology startups in the country. Last year, in fact, we passed Boston to become the second largest recipient of venture capital funding for technology startups, behind only Silicon Valley. And I am sure that everyone here agrees that Boston should never be ahead of New York on any playing field. But Boston had a lead on us for years, mostly for one reason: the strength of their research institutions, especially MIT. Last year, their researchers developed technological advances that are spun off into many new businesses. They do it every single year. In fact, active companies founded by MIT graduates generate annual revenue of about $2 trillion. And to put it in perspective, that is roughly equal to the GDP of Brazil, the world's 10th largest economy. In Silicon Valley, which draws from Berkeley and Stanford, among others, those spin-offs seem to happen nearly every single day of the week. Now, it happens here, too, thanks in part to our own great universities, including Columbia, Cooper Union, CUNY, and NYU Poly. But it doesn't happen here enough, and that's why we're putting this offer on the table. We understand we won't catch up to Silicon Valley overnight. Building a state-of-the-art campus will take years, and attracting a critical mass of technology entrepreneurs perhaps will take longer. But as with everything we've done, we are taking the long view. We estimate that in the first 30 years, an applied science campus could spin off some 400 new companies and create more than 7,000 construction jobs and more than 22,000 permanent jobs. And those permanent jobs are not just for PhDs. There will be jobs for building workers and administrative assistants and back office workers. In fact, support services at universities pay substantially more than similar jobs in other industries. And nearly 30% of all people employed in universities in New York today do not even have a BA. Of course, all of these jobs will support local restaurants and shops of every kind across all 5 boroughs. And all of these jobs will bring something else that we need: tax revenue, hundreds of millions of dollars worth, according to our estimates. But most importantly, the new campus will help us build a critical mass towards our ultimate goal: reclaiming our title as the world's capital of technological innovation. I believe we can eventually reach that goal, because even when we were the nation's manufacturing capital, we were also its creative capital. And today, the most powerful force in the world, save the divine, is the creative spirit of the entrepreneur. That spirit is alive and well in New York. In fact, it's never been stronger. But entrepreneurs feed off innovations that emerge from laboratories. And right now, our appetite for innovation is outstripping the capacity of our labs. Innovation will drive economic growth and business formation in the 21st century, just as it did in the 19th century and the 20th century. We led the way then. We must lead the way now. 200 years ago, it was enough to rely on natural advantages to build a great city. Cities were built at the intersection of rivers or along gentle bays that launched commerce and trade on mighty oceans. Those days are gone. Today, our greatest competitive advantages are the qualities that attract the best and the brightest from around the world to come here: our freedom, our diversity, our tolerance, our dynamism. And those are the qualities we foster here every day. In New York, you can create freely, you can worship freely, and no government will tell you who you can or cannot love. We say the only barrier to entry here is how big you can dream and how hard you can work. But we know that until we do more to attract world-class engineers and scientists, there will be barriers that lead entrepreneurs and investors elsewhere. And that block out the jobs of tomorrow, and that will block out the jobs of tomorrow that we need to remain the world's greatest city. We cannot allow that to happen. To create more middle-class jobs, more living wage jobs, more jobs that close the income gap between rich and poor, we cannot cling to the past. We must reach for the future, just as New Yorkers have always done. Today, we are reaching higher than ever. We imagine an economy stronger than ever. We are building a city greater than ever. The future of New York City lies in our willingness to be true to our past, always looking forward, always bold, always innovative. And I firmly believe that if we embrace that history, the future of New York City will be brighter than ever. Thank you very much.